Hello, I was going to say good afternoon, but I'm not too sure what part of the world you are in. It might be morning, it might be nighttime, so I'll say hello. Um, Welcome to the PRCA webinar, AI Reputation and Risk, a Procurement Perspective. I am Debbie Little. I'm head of PRCA's Matchmaker. That is the PRCA's agency search, selection, and pitch management consultancy. I'm also the author of the recently launched PRCA Guide to Public Relations and Public Affairs Procurement. I'm delighted to welcome you all here today for this PRCA webinar. Just to note, it's probably going to run on until about 1 o'clock, 10 past 1, depending on how many questions we have. If I can ask you all to turn your microphones off, but put your cameras on if you would like. There will be time for questions at the end of the session, but we are also quite open for you to ask questions as we go. If you've got a burning question that you want to ask myself or Stuart. The session is also being recorded, so just to make you aware of that. So, why are we running this webinar today? To mark International Procurement Day recently, the PRCA sent a letter out to leading UK and international business organisations, raising the fundamental point that AI is now front of mind and should be front of mind for all boardrooms, all businesses, all organisations. And it is the AI reputation, managing the risk of AI is a boardroom issue, but it is also a procurement issue. AI tools are shaping organizations' reputations, and the PRCA, we know it is the public relations and public affairs professionals who are best placed to manage this challenge. So the session today, what we're going to be covering, sorry, bear with me, I'm just looking at my notes. The growing role of AI in reputation formation, the risks of inaccurate or incomplete narratives, and the practical steps organizations can take. So the format today is I'm going to be joined by Stuart Bruce, PR futurist and co-founder of AI transformation consultancy Purposeful Relations. Stuart and Purposeful Relations are the PRCA's AI partner. So anything to do with AI adoption, transformation, education, we work with Purposeful Relations on absolutely everything, as do our member agencies and global members. Stuart is globally recognised as a leading expert on AI for public relations, communications, and corporate affairs. And as I say, I'm thrilled that Purposeful Relations are the PRCA's AI partner. So welcome you, Stuart, to the webinar.
Thank you, Debbie. Looking forward to it, and good to see
Great.
a good range of people here.
Great. I will just say, actually, we have a full house. We have a mixture of in-house, we have agencies, and we also have attendees from South Africa, India, the Netherlands, and Scotland. Just to make you all smile. Okay, the format today, I'm going to be asking Stuart a number of questions. Stuart is going to be answering those questions. If you have something that you want to ask, as soon as while Stuart is talking, please put your question in the chat, and we can ask that question then if it's relevant to what Stuart's talking about. Otherwise, there'll be time at the end for questions. So to start off the day, this is me, very good planning, Debbie. It is Monday, isn't it? So we're allowed to be a little bit like this. So first question for you, Stuart. Why has AI-driven reputation risk become a boardroom and a procurement issue?
Okay, great question. I think there's two elements to this. Since kind of ChatGPT launched back in kind of November 2021, a lot of the focus has been on AI adoption and how kind of communications teams can actually use AI and the kind of to do their day-to-day work more effectively. And in theory, we should now be at the stage where every single team has already got universal AI adoption and is kind of using it confidently and effectively. Realistically, we aren't there, and there are still a lot of teams where there's kind of very little happening and it's maybe experimentation. But in parallel with that, AI has also been expanding at a pace out there in the real world. And I think that's the reason why AI is a kind of procurement issue from a risk perspective and an opportunity perspective. I think
Yeah.
cool. Um, and there's a whole range of reasons why it can be like that. I mean, first of all, the fact that AI answers are becoming, sorry, just my phone on mute, but it is ringing for some reason.
It's Monday, Stuart. It is Monday.
Right. Hopefully, I've now got rid of it. Um, Yeah, so as I was saying, AI is a kind of risk and an opportunity for kind of like several reasons, and kind of the main one is that people are increasingly beginning to use AI answers over and above search. So people's first touch point on an organization, its brands, its product, its people, is often going to be what they discover via AI. And that's regardless of the fact whether they're actually using kind of AI to search for it. Because even if you just do, say, search in Google, you see that AI overview. And I had a kind of fantastic example last week when I spoke at another event, and there was the head of corporate affairs for British Heart Foundation was there, and she was saying that one of their real concerns is that often the answers in AI overviews are wrong, and this is when people are searching for things about heart attacks. So it's absolutely really serious that you're getting misleading information in these AI overviews. And then if you look at that from a kind of corporate organizational perspective, what you're seeing is those kind of inaccuracies can surface across a whole range of issues. Um, and I think one of the challenges is sometimes we hear people talking about this on a quite superficial level. So maybe they're just talking about it at a brand or a marketing level, and they'll talk about things like, are we visible in AI answers? And of course, that's important, and it's something that we as kind of public relations professionals need to be working for. But there's also that risk element of making sure that how you're portrayed is doing the right things to shape your reputation. And I think that's why it needs to be a major issue for kind of procurement looking at that.
Great. No, that's interesting. I was hosting a PRCA leaders lunch in London last week, and it it came up a lot. That the role of procurement, managing the risk associated with AI, the importance of de-risking these issues for corporations, and also where it's going to lead ultimately, which we're not covering today, but from on the financial commercial side of things as far as procurement are concerned, in terms of agency sort of fees, etc. um that's great, thank you, Stuart. The second question: who is using AI assistants to form opinions about organizations, and why should procurement care?
Okay, so the reason why I think this one is critical is often the perception is of consumers using AI to maybe research a product or something, which is true, they are, but actually all stakeholders are using AI for research. So, for example, you might have politicians or regulators or investors or analysts actually using AI to kind of research. And I think one of the things there is because if they're doing that, actually that first touch point influences the narrative as it goes on. So the first things they're going to discover from that AI answer are going to influence what they're going to be looking at next. So your reputation is very much being kind of formed by what stakeholders are finding there. And I think the kind of the second kind of element of that is actually AI as a stakeholder. What that means is everything your organization is saying is influencing what AI answers say about you, but actually what your organization says in the first place is being influenced by AI because people within the team, within your company, are going to use AI to research things before they create something. So you've already got that kind of two-way relationship going on. It's then compounded because if we look at your intermediary stakeholders, so for example, journalists or analysts, they're using AI to kind of research what they're creating, but at the same time, AI is influencing what they're creating because they're also using it for research. And then the same applies when you get to that final stakeholder level of employees or customers or suppliers. So it's a really kind of complex relationship that you've got out there. Um, and in terms of kind of, and this is why it's so important to look at kind of AI as a stakeholder and not see it as something just simply about kind of a glorified version of search engine optimization.
So this is sort of looking at AI as a stakeholder, as one of those many stakeholders that you're needing to influence.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of probably the most compelling reason to think of it AI as a stakeholder is if you think about what stakeholders actually do, especially intermediary stakeholders like journalists, analysts, they're creating brand new content based on synthesizing information from lots of different places. So they'll do their research and they'll create something new. That's what AI is doing. It's pulling together lots and lots of different sources and it is creating a new piece of content in every answer. That's very different to what traditional search does, where all that's doing is simply surfacing stuff that already exists. It's not creating that new content. So with search, visibility is obviously important. You want to be at the top of that list. With AI, the actual content of it is really important.
We didn't prepare this question, so you might be very cross with me for asking it. But I'm just, it's do you have a sort of a scenario where, organizations haven't been on top of this,
Yeah,
and would you like to share one?
absolutely. I mean, there's probably a couple of examples that it's worth citing here. So the first one is a university where they were having an industrial dispute. And if you looked at all of the AI answers, they were all from the trade union's perspective. And when you began to study why that might be, what you discovered is from the university, they had a very traditional kind of way of doing their crisis comms. And if a journalist was asking a question, they were sending a statement directly back to the journalist, and the quote was appearing in the media. And it was perfect. It was a really good statement. It appeared. So it was a kind of very traditional approach. What the trade union was doing is it was publishing its statement on its website. Its members were talking about it on social media. It was appearing in earned media. It was in multiple places. So when AI was trying to kind of verify which was the most accurate information, it could find one touch point from the university, but multiple reputable touch points from the trade union. The university's rationale as to why it didn't put the statement on its website is, well, the website's for positive news. This is bad news. We don't want to kind of promote it even more by publishing it on our website. But what that actually meant is the source of truth was the trade union, not the university.
Yeah.
Um, and a second example wasn't a kind of real life one. It was actually done as an experiment where a group of medical researchers basically made up a fake condition and published kind of papers on it, which AI then began to cite about this fake. And even though the papers actually had things in it that this is not true, we've made it up, and things like the research was credited to a researcher at Starfleet Academy on board the USS Enterprise. AI didn't get that all this was kind of was not true, and it was beginning to cite it. And just the fact that you can do that so easily kind of flags up kind of what the issues are. Because the third element of that is there are going to be malicious actors out there who if you can influence AI answers in positive ways by getting the truth into them, they can influence them in negative ways by getting their kind of attack lines and untruths about your organization or your people into AI answers, unless you're doing something about it first.
Yeah, yeah, and then that's exactly sort of where you have the misinformation spreading, isn't it? In those kind of case studies, we have got a couple of questions coming through. Can you see them, Stuart?
Right.
Don't worry if you can't. Someone's asked, which is probably quite. I don't know whether we'll be coming. You'll probably be covering this later, but how do we influence AI as a stakeholder?
Okay, so yeah, I'm just kind of having a kind of quick look at the them now. I'll actually answer that first one first about is part of the AI problem, not just what we put out, but what content we already have out there, because actually that's a really important element of it, is it's really difficult to get stuff to change. And if you, there was a paper published about a month ago now by NATO on disinformation, and one of the things it talks about there is pre-bunking, um, or pre-buttal rather than rebuttal. And that's about making sure that your information is out there all of the time as early as possible, because that way it's you're the reputable source of truth rather than trying to correct something after the fact. Um, and kind of related to that, there's this kind of thing about a content declutter. And this is actually a complicated part of it because you may want to do that, but also you don't want to kind of, destroy kind of historic records or kind of change the past. So sometimes it might be an idea to update a piece of old content, to signpost it to a fresher piece of content, or to kind of add the correction on rather than kind of removing it entirely. Um, then the big question about kind of how do we influence AI as a stakeholder? That could take up the entire webinar. And in fact, I've done several webinars where that's been the entire webinar. I mean, crudely, there are kind of three elements to it. Well, there are two elements to it to start off with, and that's the stuff that you're doing on your owned media. So it's how you're structuring your own content, how you're publishing it, and there are some technical aspects to that. But there's also really thinking about what that content needs to be, and if it's genuinely answering the questions that people are going to be asking on AI. So that's one element of it. The other element of it is looking at all of the sources that AI cites when it puts together its answers. So whether that's earned media, traditional media, whether that's owned media for partner organizations or institutions, whether that's user media, what people are kind of discussing with you. And in terms of the weight, all of these things, there's a lot of misinformation out there because there's 101 kind of vendors selling tools, and they kind of published a whole series of reports saying, "Ooh, 95% of kind of citations in AI are in earned media." And then another one will say 43%. Another one will say you've got to be in Reddit. They contradict each other. So last November, Purposeful Relations published a white paper where we analysed lots of these reports to try to draw out the common themes and trends. Because if enough and them were saying the same thing or pointing in the same direction, we could be reasonably certain that was true. And kind of three of the things that we identified off the back of that was kind of was recency, relevance, and reputation. What recency means is how recently a piece of content was published, because AI favors content that's fresh. And perhaps one of the reasons for that is it's already going to have information in its large language model with a cutoff at a certain point of time that kind of gets updated periodically. But it supplements, when it creates an answer, the information in the model with fresh stuff that it can find on the internet. So hence the reason it's going to think the recent information is more valuable, because if it otherwise it would have already been in the model. The relevance is interesting because it throws on its head some of the ways we think about earned media, because it's not necessarily looking for the most prestigious titles, it's looking for the most relevant titles. So that might mean that a small trade magazine is more important than Bloomberg or the BBC because it's actually really relevant to the answer to that question. And then the third element of that is reputation. And this is, where AI is attempting to assess whether this is a reputable source to cite. So can it find proof points? If you've got a spokesperson quoted in a news in an article, can it see that same spokesperson on your website with a biography that says that's what they're an expert in? Do they have a LinkedIn profile that kind of shows they're an expert on that? Have they spoken at conferences? The more of those kind of proof points that prove the reputation, the more helpful that is to kind of AI.
Thank you, Stuart. We'll come back to the comment from Abina a bit later on, but I think what you've just been talking about then is exactly what the purpose of this webinar is. It's about looking at AI reputation and risk, and from a procurement perspective. Moving on slightly, AI versus SEO. You distinguish AI from traditional SEO. Why does that matter? And what is the difference?
Okay, I think this is really important. In fact, if just this morning, there was a comment on a kind of WhatsApp group that I participate in where somebody was asking a kind of related question. Basically, their SEO team was wanting to allow their SEO agency to do outreach to journalists on important media titles to the PR team with the purpose of getting backlinks, which is such an old-fashioned kind of way of going about it. And it also has a kind of fundamental misunderstanding of how even SEO works, because actually for SEO, you don't necessarily need a backlink because there's something called inferred links, where actually getting that mention has SEO value. But with AI, that's even more important because it's not expecting to find that backlink there. It's actually expecting, to find credible information that's relevant, that's truthful, that's factual. And I think the big kind of danger we have at the moment for both in-house teams and procurement professionals and for kind of PR agencies is that the search and digital agencies are being very proactive in this space of influencing AI answers. They are pivoting very quickly from doing SEO to doing GEO, generative engine optimization. But the reality is they could only do part of it. The vast majority of things that influence AI answers are things that kind of fall outside the remit of what a traditional SEO company would be really strong at doing and fall within the remit of things that PR people are really good at doing. And especially kind of around the area of actually understanding it and minimizing risk and making sure that the things you're doing to optimize AI answers don't actually end up being damaging to you.
Yeah, I think it's, obviously all of what you're saying so far is that, this managing reputation AI risk, it is the job of the PR and PA professionals, which is where the PRCA, as the largest global trade association for the industry, is standing very strong on this point, that it is the PR and PA's jobs. It is our remit to take this work on for our clients, which is obviously going to be challenging, but it's exciting times ahead, isn't it, as well for us as an industry. Um, Stuart, what practical steps can procurement teams take today to manage AI related reputation risk?
Okay, I think procurement teams need to be sitting down with their kind of corporate communications and making sure that they are buying the right services and including the right things in their budget. And by the right things, the number one thing they need to do is that AI stakeholder map. So actually doing an audit of what AI thinks about your says about your organization, about your people, about its brands, about its products, about the issues, the industry issues surrounding it. So you talked about public affairs. Actually, there's sometimes it's the issues that are really important, not necessarily the mentions of your organization. So that's the number one thing they should be doing. Off the back of that, they should be looking to ensure that either existing suppliers or if an RFP goes out, that it is looking for expertise in being able to do this. So actually, organizations that understand how, suppliers that actually understand how to incorporate influencing AI into a communications plan, because it's not something you want to be doing separately. It's actually something that needs to be integral. So it's about kind of procurement and corporate comms teams really thinking through what the brief is and making sure that the suppliers they're appointing actually have the expertise to do it in the fullest sense, not just a small part of it, which is kind of the generative engine optimization kind of part of it.
What about from a procurement or RFP perspective, or from an ongoing agency and client relationship monitoring in place to kind of catch inaccuracies?
Yeah,
Anything?
absolutely. And I think this is kind of one of the challenges that we're seeing in the procurement space at the moment, is because there are 101 different tools out there that claim to be able to monitor and measure AI answers. The reality is they all lack data, so they can't do it very well. So for procurement, trying to write a specification for what they're looking for is difficult. This is actually another PRCA work stream that's happening at the moment. Is is thinking about precisely what that should be saying. What valid metrics would look like.
Okay, that's exciting. So that's a watch this space from the PRCA. Is that the innovation group, Stuart?
It is the innovation group.
Ah,
And as I was
okay.
saying that, I was thinking, we haven't announced this yet, so I might have just blown the
No,
announcement.
no, no one heard what Stuart just said. Okay, moving on. Um, who is best placed to lead all this work? So, in terms of managing AI risk, AI reputation, who's best placed to lead this work, and how should the different functions collaborate?
Okay, so I'm going to answer this in a kind of roundabout way by saying who shouldn't lead it, and that is IT or technology, because this is not a technology problem. This is a culture and a people issue. Um, and once again, just this morning, I had an example of another consultant who was meant to be running a training session on Friday on kind of AI and communications, and it has just been cancelled because procurement came in and said, "Oh, actually, our technology training provider can do this." Totally missing the point that they absolutely can't, because the really important part of this is actually the understanding of communications and being able to put that training in and being able to put that training and consultancy into context. So for one of our clients, we had a kind of shortly after being appointed, we had a wobbly moment where we discovered they'd just appointed Deloitte as well to work on to advise on AI, and we were thinking, oh no, this is us out the door. We're not going to be able to do this. But actually, from the comms, the comms and corporate affairs team's perspective, what they got from Deloitte, it wasn't wrong, but it was of limited value because it was so generic and so high level that they
Yeah.
didn't actually understand the communications function, and they weren't able to kind of go into the detail of what the risks were, what the opportunities were, how the team should be using it, um, and this bigger picture of things like your reputation in an AI. That's not something they can touch or talk about.
Yeah, no, very important. I'm going to just slip over to Obina's question. Not really related, but it's a valid point, I'm sure, for some organizations. If AI is part of partnership, why is it that organizations discourage their staff from using AI, but to use their own knowledge most of the time?
I think this comes back to this culture issue. It's very reminiscent of the early days of social media, where the easiest thing for an organization to do was to put a ban in place. Because they didn't understand it, they could see the risks, and they thought that was the thing that made them safest. Actually, the reverse was true then, and the reverse is true now. Something like 70% of people at work have confessed to using something called shadow AI. So this is AI tools that haven't been approved by the employer. That means it doesn't have any of the security and the privacy protection that a commercial or enterprise tool would have. So by far the safest way is to make the tools available, but critically to include proper AI governance with it. And it seems that almost every week we hear examples of organizations getting this wrong. So, in fact, I'm just putting together our newsletter at the moment, and I've got a story in there about EY, who have published a thought leadership report um, on, I think it was on cybersecurity, but then it's been found out that actually lots of the sources they've cited at the end are made up, they're hallucinations. Um, and this is a perfect example of what goes wrong with AI. That's not a problem with AI. It's a problem with the EY consultants that wrote the report, because a fundamental part of good use and governance is human in the loop, that you check AI outputs, you don't just take them at face value. And the ironic thing is, EY actually advise people on policy and their clients on policy and governance. But there's a huge difference between having a policy, which I'm sure they have, and I'm sure it will say human in the loop, and governance, which means it's got to include training and checking. If the training had been in place, those consultants would have known what that actual clause in the policy means. They'd have actually been comfortable of understanding how to check stuff, when to check stuff. But kind of clearly that hasn't happened.
Yeah, no, I think that's really that's spot on and an interesting example. I think all of what we're saying here is that the PR and public affairs teams are best placed to lead on all of this. So, for any of the agencies here on the webinar, go back to your clients. I'm sure you are doing this all of the time, but it's about managing the risk, de-risking the sort of the threats of AI as such, but also, giving your clients the assurity that as a PRCA member agency, you're abiding by, very strict codes of conduct and governance, which is obviously something that you've referred to earlier, Stuart.
Mm,
We've got a couple more questions before we finish. So we talked longer than we planned, Stuart. Always, I try to.
absolutely.
I just can't stop once I get started. Um, if procurement is commissioning support, what should be in the scope of work? Sort of list of.
I think we kind of covered that earlier in
Okay.
terms
Okay.
of it's doing that audit and stakeholder map to begin with. It
Reputation
is
audits. Yeah.
updating your comms plan, and then it's having that kind of monitoring and measurement and measuring element to it. So it's a
Yeah.
cycle, and you're not just doing it as a one-off. You're constantly circling back.
Fine. And then also, I know that you made a point about the crisis and misinformation readiness plans. Obviously.
Yeah, I think this is a key one. Is I described at an event last week. I described if you've got a crisis communications plan that doesn't have AI as a stakeholder as part of it, it's a wish list. It's not a plan.
Right. That's incredibly valuable. That's great. Okay, I think you're going to ask me something now, aren't you, Stuart?
Yes. Well, it's really, what role kind of the PRCA play in kind of helping kind of procurement directors to actually procure these services, but vice versa in terms of helping agencies to respond to them.
Yeah, I think we launched the first ever PRCA guide to public relations and public affairs procurement about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and this was to we've done a lot of work as being head of Matchmaker. We've done a lot of work with both clients and agencies to define and determine what is the definitive sort of guide to best practice pitching in our industry, and the guide to PR and PA procurement does cover this. So obviously, the PRCA supporting our members with the likes of such best practice reports. We've also got the PRCA Code of Conduct. We've got the Communications Management Standard accreditation that many of our agency members have, which is showing that, an agency has met the sort of global kite mark of excellence for the PR industry. It looks at issues such as business planning, financial management, campaign management, client management, etc. So it's providing procurement teams with that reassurance that they are going to be working with a communications agency that is robust and is solid in terms of having met all those criteria. We also, I'll let you talk about that for a couple of minutes before we finish off, Stuart. But the PRCA's responsible AI approach and the AI green paper that you worked with our comms team on recently. Would you like to just share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so so it was interesting that we called it a green paper because one of the things that PRCA members were asking for is for the PRCA to provide almost a model kind of policy or a model template for governance. And in reality, you can't do that because it's got to actually fit the unique culture of the organization, the industry sector that you're in. So, say a policy for the pharma industry or government would be totally different to, say, a consumer brand or a local authority. What the green paper does is it explores all of the things that you need to be thinking about when you're creating your own policy and your governance. And the kind of the real value of it is it provides those kind of thinking points. And it's also intended to be a living document. So at the end of each chapter, we actually ask a series of questions where people are coming back to us with either additional things we can include in the next version or asking for kind of clarifications on things that we could maybe explain in a slightly better way. So yeah, watch this space for the kind of what happens on the green paper next.
Great. And I do know, Stuart, that you're more than happy to share the green paper, and we will share you'll share the procurement guide and a few other documents that we talked about. Um, a few questions. Claire Rushton, why do smaller companies appear to be winning in AI search over big established brands?
Um, Well, first of all, I wouldn't say they're necessarily winning. I think it's going to vary from industry sector to industry sector, and different types of product. But I think sometimes it's because what they're doing is more authentic. So they are focusing on things like explaining the quality of the product. So say how something is, maybe how a piece of furniture is constructed and the materials that go into it, how to choose the best one, for your house. Whereas big brands often focus on things like price or kind of traditional brand advertising, and there's nothing there for AI to get its teeth into. Because one of the things AI doesn't kind of cite is paid media. So if a lot of the activity you're doing is this traditional kind of advertising, marketing, communications focused content, then there's nothing for kind of AI to actually latch onto. So I think that's potentially one of the reasons.
Okay, great. And then hence, once again, the importance of public relations and public affairs in this space. We have a question from Francis Kizito, drawing from a recent case of South Africa government withdrawing its AI policy because of AI hallucinated sources. How does the PR department step in to avert such a crisis arising from a technical department policy team?
Okay, so I actually spoke at an event in Dublin last week, and this was one of the topics we talked about. Um, when that governance is being created, it's absolutely critical that corporate comms, corporate affairs, PR is sitting on that working group that creates the governance because we're going to have this kind of 360 view of everything that could happen. If you just leave it to, say, legal or technology, they're going to kind of focus on the mechanics of doing it. Whereas actually, as I kind of said earlier, to make a policy work, it has to be accompanied with training. It has to be accompanied with culture change. When the UK Government Communications Service introduced AI, they now have 95% of their 7,000 people using AI on a daily basis. But the model that they used to get to there was the kind of the beacon model about kind of behavior change. So they very much kind of thought about how do we get people to do this safely, responsibly, and ethically by focusing on the culture of change rather than just the technology and the tools.
Great, thank you. Before we finish off, we had an hour allocated for the webinar and we thought we'd finish at 1, but no, we've gone on a little bit longer. Just before we finish off, is there anyone else that has any questions, would like to turn off their microphone, add a comment, tell us what their experience has been like with their clients or in their markets? as far as managing AI reputation and risk is concerned thus far? No one? Okay. I'm thinking, Stuart, it might be quite nice to follow on this webinar and sort of evolve the conversation a little bit further based on, what we've discussed today. Perhaps we can look at, AI as a stakeholder, um, in a bit more detail, specifically for half an hour on lunchtime, if that sounds good.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So Stuart,
That's brilliant. What
leave.
I'll do after this is I'll create I don't know whether anybody here has used Google Notebook LM, but it's a kind of really good way of sharing information. So I'll create a public notebook and pop things into it like the procurement guide, the green paper, the research white paper that we published, and put them all together in one place. And because they're in a Google Notebook LM, you'll actually be able to use AI to question them rather than just sitting and reading the reports. You'll be able to use kind of AI to interrogate them. So I'll do that this afternoon, and then we can circulate the email with the link to it a little bit later.
Great. Stuart, there was one question I've forgotten to ask you. What should people be doing in the next 90 days?
Next 90 days is they should be doing that audit to understand how they're showing up in AI answers. Is the first thing. The second thing is for in-house teams. Well, actually, for both in-house teams and agencies, they should be making sure that everybody in their team actually understands AI as a stakeholder and why it's important, because it's not something you can kind of siphon off to just one person in the corner. The way to influence AI answers is for everybody in the team to know that that's what they're doing in their day-to-day job and not make big changes, but make lots and lots of small changes. So those would be the two things that I would say people need to do.
Great, that's wonderful. So a huge thank you for all of you for joining us today. It's been lovely to see some faces, and but it's great to know that you're all there. Any comments, please do share, and Stuart will be in touch with all the additional information. Anything to do with Matchmaker, reach out to myself, Debbie Little. Anything to do with AI, reach out to Stuart Bruce, PRCA's AI partner. And before we finish off, also a huge thank you to PRCA Head of Communications, Gabriella Weiss, for arranging today and for setting up this webinar and coming up with the topic, etc., for you all. Okay, happy Monday, everybody. Have a great day. Take
Hi,
care.
everybody.